Okay, good. So where did you get the idea for BitTorrent from?
Oh boy. I worked on a lot of networking projects generally at a bunch of failed startups. Actually, some people might have heard of Mojo Nation, which was written in PyCon, and I worked on that. So I kind of knew something about networking, and I had some ideas about various things. The thing I thought I had good ideas about was how to do swarming distribution. So I decided to write something to do swarming distribution. And there were other ideas that I had that really didn't have anything to do with how to, like, what would make a compelling application, but had to do with how to go about writing one. One that was rather, one that was very much against the consensus way of doing things back then, or the apparent consensus, it might have been a false consensus, had to do with how to do networking. And I thought very strongly, having gotten burnt by it a zillion times, that you shouldn't use blocking I/O basically ever. And you should just use asynchronous I/O for everything. And of course, this can be a little bit annoying because you have to have disjointed code to handle responses from the code that actually sends queries. However, that's a constant factor overhead in annoyance, while blocking I/O gets you exponential difficulties as the size of your application grows. This is actually a fairly mainstream concept in Python these days because Twisted is written, the core of Twisted is written almost identically to the asynchronous I/O core that I wrote. And in fact, there's a fair amount of stuff that's in Twisted that was added after I added it to my own thing called Raw Server. And these days, actually, the next release of BitTorrent, Raw Server is actually going to be wrapping Twisted.
Wow,
Yeah,
okay, good.
Yeah, there were
Good publicity for the Twisted guys.
Yeah, there were some features of Twisted that we wanted and didn't feel like re-implementing. So.
You have quite an interest in mathematics, it's obvious from reading your life journal. So I was interested to know, was BitTorrent in any way a mathematical invention, or was it basically just your impression of how to do things implemented in Python?
Well, BitTorrent is actually very mathematically lame. It does things in ways which didn't in the past anyway appeal to academics. Like academic projects to do swarming pretty consistently follow a particular arc, which is they try and say, well, how about we do swarming distribution with a tree? And they rapidly realize that this is not very practical because when an intermediary node dies, the whole thing is just imposed. So then they go, well, how about we have an overlay network of multiple trees kind of laid on top of each other that follow different paths through the whole thing.
So if an idea doesn't work, then try it again.
Yeah. Well, this leads to the whole question of why not just connect everybody to a whole bunch of random peers, and rather than have a particular tree topology, which everything must be distributed.
Remove a structure that will end up as a single point of failure, in other words.
Yeah, not exactly a single point of failure, but basically by creating multiple overlay trees, you've just introduced failure modes over simply having everyone tell all their peers what it is they have and sending wherever it makes sense to send. However, this introduces a whole bunch of failure modes which you can actually study and write a paper about. So someone actually asked me yesterday, so there must be a whole bunch of graph theory in BitTorrent. I was like, the graph theory in BitTorrent is that if you manually construct a random network, it tends not to segment very much, which is, for those who know what that means, it's a very obvious observation. And it literally is, I went through this exercise of figuring out how to do that, and there are centralized trackers in BitTorrent for exactly that reason. It turns out some experiments I did before I had a blog, so I didn't blog about them, and I really should rewrite the source code to them because I lost it, is it turns out if you have a network with churn, and you're trying to use peer gossip so that people find more peers, that segments really, really easily. So I went through this exercise of figuring that out and just decided, you know what, I'll just make it so that peer finding is totally centralized and run numbers, and of course, the actual overhead of this is quite small. And it works very well because it is a manually constructed random network, and it has this very simple protocol of give me a bunch of random peers. So.
Okay, great. Do you know how many implementations there have been of the BitTorrent protocol now?
It depends what part you're talking about. The BitTorrent core, there have been a whole bunch, only a few that have any significant usage.
Yeah.
BitTorrent trackers, there are scads of, lots of which are used quite a bit actually. The BitTorrent tracker protocol is on top of HTTP, which makes it pretty easy to implement and pretty easy to deploy in all kinds of places. And that was actually a very good decision on my part, it turned out, because it made it so versatile and so easy to implement. I'm not a big fan of HTTP as a protocol in general, particularly HTTP 1.1. Yeah. But if you have something that really is just a request, a single request with a single response that you just sort of do once in a while, it is a very good map.
Why TCP based and not UDP based? Normally messaging protocols are UDP based,
right? So the first rule of writing peer-to-peer applications is don't re-implement TCP/IP. People start out saying, hey, we'll use UDP to make it more efficient, and then they go, oh, well, we need a multi-way handshake to avoid denial of service attacks, and then we need retransmission to make reliable delivery, and then we need a slow start to not pose the network connection immediately, and then after a couple months of working on it, you've re-implemented TCP/IP badly. So
I think anyone who re-implemented it probably would re-implement it badly. It's a fairly robust protocol. So basically it relies on the virtual circuit and all the stuff that's already in TCP to maintain the virtual circuit.
Well, just point-to-point communications from one point to another. TCP/IP, TCP has this very robust abstraction, which is it's two pipes going in either direction of data that's being sent, so it's ordered and reliable, and it handles congestion control for you, and it does all of these quite well. And actually in BitTorrent, one of the big problems is, well, you don't actually know what your potential throughput is on the connections that you have. So I had this bright idea of, hey, well, let's just open up a bunch of connections at once and send data over them and see which one gets data sent fastest. And in order to find the best connections overall, it kind of tries out new ones once in a while. And the way it figures out which are the better ones is it uses tit for tat for your peers. So if you have a good pipe and someone else has a good pipe, then sooner or later you try uploading to them. That starts going fast, so they reciprocate and upload to you. And then you both realize, hey, this is a good connection, so we'll just keep using it. When I first started working on BitTorrent, this actually seemed like a very cracked out approach. The whole motivation behind it is, well, let's just dump all the smarts into the clients, because a swarm needs to be two things. It needs to be very, very reliable, and it needs to be able to scale up a lot. So I decided on this absolutely ridiculous architecture, because one could show almost trivially that it should be very reliable, and it should scale up a lot. Assuming that you could actually get it to work at all.
So when you implemented BitTorrent, what aspects of Python did you find most helpful and what aspects were least helpful?
Well, it isn't really any one particular thing so much as kind of an approach that's helpful with Python. Before I started working in Python, I mostly used Java, and before that I mostly used C, and there was a brief period where I used a lot of JavaScript, circa 1996, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and everyone should use it. And it turned out I was right, and it's now called Ajax. I was just 10 years early.
Yeah, JavaScript's a good language.
Yeah, it's basically a good language, but the object model in the web browser is totally inconsistent with the way the language is supposed to work. It's very strange. But so going from C to my very first language, by the way, was assembly language. I programmed in red code for the programming language Core Wars. And when I was like 12 years old, I actually did pretty well in a Core Wars competition. One time, you used to find lots of references to it if you did web searches for my name, but they've now gotten buried under a zillion other totally unrelated references to me. But I sort of believe on some level that everyone should learn assembly as their first language, because then you actually know what the computer's doing, and then you can learn C after that, and then the more higher level language after that. Unfortunately, the way programming languages are taught is kind of heading in the exact opposite direction at this point. But answering your question about what's actually useful in Python, jumping from C to Java, at the time it was like right at the beginning of this like huge hype wave for Java about how it had security in the language, which it actually didn't at the time, but was getting there. And I forget what else was part of the hype. Of course, the real advantages of programming in Java are that it does bounds checking on strings, it has garbage collection, and it has exception handling, none of which were part of the huge hype wave of Java, but all of which make your life way easier when you're actually writing something.
Yeah, the principal hype was write once, run everywhere, wasn't it? Which basically became write once, debug everywhere.
Yeah, well, there were two aspects of that. One was that you could write something and it would behave identically on all platforms, which, with two very important exceptions, was mostly the case. There's no equivalent of like long jump in Java. There's no like control flow structure or anything that's very non-cross-platform. But the file system API in Java, someone at Sun decided they didn't like the way open works and decided they wanted to totally redesign it. And it resulted in a file API that acted kind of funny and really behaved consistently across platforms. And of course, actual file system semantics really do differ from platform to platform. So the
Python's had problems with that, of course.
Yeah, well, Python faithfully reproduces the general crapitude of POSIX APIs. Open and select, select in particular being a rather egregious example. But open, once you know all of its quirks, more or less behaves reasonably. Select just is bizarre and acts strangely in all kinds of random ways in all kinds of random systems. So I started using Python because this job I had was using it. I'd heard it was a good language for quite a while. The main advantages I find in Python, I spend very little time actually haggling with the language that I'm using. It doesn't try to stop me from doing whatever it is that I want to do. And I kind of had like an interest in language design before that, and I still sort of do, but it ceased to be like a massive pain point.
So if you worked on Mojo Nation, you must have been using Python since 1.5.2, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I remember the 1.5.2 like didn't have real garbage collection, which kind of sucked.
Yeah, couldn't pick out the cycles.
And yeah, and it didn't have Unicode, which has made no difference for me whatsoever. And I'm sure there are, I remember the jump from 1.5.2 to 2.0 was a really huge one in all kinds of ways, but I don't remember all the details anymore.
Well, VIA, let's not forget was it 4-day lifetime of 1.6? There was an intermediate release as well, but yeah.
I didn't know that there was a 1.6.
Well, I think the 1.6 release was mostly for commercial and political reasons. Yeah. So we've had a few questions submitted by people who've made additions on the wiki. Thank you everyone for putting your questions in. Somebody wanted to know what, if any, recently added features of Python did you seize upon with most relish, saying, aha, now I can finally do some tasks that have been difficult before.
Well, in terms of the thing that I seized upon like the most directly and changed the most code, the introduction of true and false got rid of all these true equals 1, false equals 0 lines at the top of all my files. But that's obviously a very silly thing. In terms of things that actually changed my the way I write code, list comprehensions by far made the most difference in terms of actually like changing the flow of my code.
And the generally iterative approach to expressions and generator expressions have been introduced as well, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Most of the times when you want to generate an expression, you actually do dump it into a list. So list comprehensions were most of it. I was actually using iteration stuff before that, but you'd run in like making a class and implementing under it was quite a lot more hoops to jump through than just having a generated expression in the middle of something. Other stuff that I use that's been new, been like for else. I use quite a bit, and Python I believe used to but no longer does have some restriction about like breaks or continues out of a try catch.
Perhaps you're thinking that continue didn't used to be allowed inside, and was it inside an except clause? Certainly there was some restriction of use on continue.
Yeah, there was something very...
there was some removed, I think, either 2.3 or maybe 2.2, something like that.
Yeah, it was something that seemed very artificial to me. Apparently, I have a very strange concept of control flow. See, in my head, there's this concept of a stack, because I still sort of think of everything as being written in assembly language. There's this concept of a stack, which is just data in some order. And then there are points in the program which you can jump to at any time. And the rule is, if you want to jump to a particular point, you need to truncate the stack to some depth and put some more data on top of it, frequently known as return values, and then jump to a particular point that expects the stack to look like that. As long as the stack actually looks the way the thing expects, then everything's kosher. Continuations really break this concept horribly, and advanced continuation usage just breaks my brain. But, and so does try finally actually. But when you have, so as far as I'm concerned, any piece of control flow that follows this paradigm is perfectly kosher. So break, continue, return from the middle of a function, and raise are all, perfectly okay as far as I'm concerned. And I wind up using for else a lot and having these loops that I'll like write things which are like for blah 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 else return, and it's right in the middle of a function stuff. I usually actually don't really think out exactly how complicated loops will write before I do them. I just sit down and start typing, and I write while true at the top of something. And then I add checks about where you want to break and continue and stuff in places, and then I just sort of optimize them out when I'm done.
Finally putting the conditions after the while instead of guarding the breaks.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm told this can sometimes make my code a little strange to read. It does result in it being very compact. I have a little tradition whenever I do something particularly strange, is I write a comment in the line before it saying Nicholas Worth can bite me.
Okay.
Because
for those who don't remember who Nicholas Wirth was, he invented the Pascal language.
Yeah, the early versions of Pascal, among other problems, like say, not actually having real string primitives, had a problem that you had this very dictatorial notion of control flow, which was not only were there no exceptions, but there was no break, no continue, and you could only have a return at the end of the function.
Well, that's probably something to do with the fact that, was Wirth a Swiss, or was he, if he was Swiss, he was German Swiss, so that might have something to do with it. Okay, you've been using Python quite a long time then, and before BitTorrent, you developed code, right? A revision control system that's also written in Python?
Not before BitTorrent.
Oh, okay.
See, I was working on putting together like the second CodeCon,
yeah.
which I was doing when I really should have been working on BitTorrent.
Displacement activity, it's a great thing, isn't it?
So during the time when I really should have been working on putting together CodeCon, I spent some of it, I've been thinking about merge algorithms for a couple of years, and come to the conclusion that they were very difficult. So,
in the general case.
Yeah, I just couldn't get them to do what I wanted. So I had this, I sort of decided they were very hard and kind of shelved it, thought about it every once in a while. And I was putting together CodeCon, and I was actually looking for the star merge document at one point, which is something about merging that's used in Arch. And I couldn't find it because the Arch web pages kept going down and being moved to new places. And so while I was looking for this, I had this bright idea of how to get distributed merging to actually work. And I spent a few days pacing around the house, making notes and stuff about how to go about doing it until I had something that I thought worked. And then I posted it, I blogged about it and said, hey, here's some reference code, and I don't have the time to work on this, so I'm just posting it, and I wash my hands of it. And actually my brother took an interest in it after that, and I kind of fleshed it out into a real version control system.
But it came back to haunt you?
Yeah, well, so recently, a bunch of version control developers have actually started like talking to each other and stuff, and the state of, in particular due to discussions with Nathaniel Smith of Monotone, who's probably the world's leading expert in three-way merge. So I know about three-way merge. Yes, Nathaniel. Figured out a lot more about merge algorithms, and so the merge algorithm that Codeville currently uses, I've been referring to as sloppy Codeville merge, and there's new precise Codeville merge, which I've been working on for a while and is mostly fleshed out at this point. There are one or two little like edge cases, and I want to get it to be handled properly, but you can go to the wiki at revcontrol.org, that's REDCTRL, and there's code up there for no frills precise Codeville merge that behaves quite well and will do merging properly most of the time. So,
okay, just moving back to BitTorrent.
Okay, I didn't actually finish
the
history that actually happened. So around the time that
it's just the conference ends around 4:30 this afternoon.
So around the time that all that mania was going on, by total coincidence, me and Nathaniel Smith were going over over merge algorithms, and invented, and based on first principles, it came up with this interesting data structure for doing merges with, where you keep all the lines that have ever appeared in a given file in order, and use this for merges. And it turns out this is known as a weave, which was how SCCS works.
Yeah, that was what SCCS did.
Yeah, so that idea was just sort of forgotten until I reinvented it last year.
Okay. So that's how Codeville works too.
No, that's how precise Codeville merge works. The sloppy Codeville merge works in a different way, which it can result in some wacky edge cases that we can make.
Okay. So you have your own license for BitTorrent.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Did you just take somebody else's and put a few bits?
It's basically Jabber license.
The Jabber license. Okay, yeah. Fine. Yeah. And where did the name come from? Did you choose
BitTorrent? Well, you know, we hired a marketing company and paid them millions of dollars, and they, no, actually, I came up with it.
Okay. It's quite interesting, actually. I don't know if anyone knows the Sun logo, which is the word Sun 4 times in a square. Sun did actually, at the start of their lifetime, pay a marketing company approximately $40,000, and so somebody from the warehouse came up with the Sun thing. And it was sitting on its base, and so the $40,000 was, I guess basically they paid about $1,000 a degree. The company was rotated at 45 degrees, and that ended up being the corporate logo. Alex Martelli wanted to know why you haven't rewritten BitTorrent in C.
Why would I?
Good question. Well, I guess he's wondering whether you're finding any efficiency problems with Python.
Not really. It's mostly doing string copies. So if you do a networking protocol where you are escaping characters and stuff, which, by the way, that's a horrible idea. There's this bugaboo about where if you read about designing network protocols, they tell you they should be human readable. The advantage of making a human readable protocol is that humans are really kind of dumb. And if a protocol is human readable, it's probably so simple you can't really scrub its semantics really badly. However, that's not really a very important feature for a protocol to have. What a protocol really should be is very simple. And something that makes protocols rather non-human readable, but makes them very, very simple, is to have length prefixing on all your strings sent over the wire.
Yeah, I saw that you're using a net string-like representation in your protocols.
For the tracker responses, there's this thing called B-encoding, which is, I'm told it's very, very similar semantically to this thing called JSON, which people use in Python.
Yeah, well, that's why JSON is used for client-server communications.
Yeah, so I'm using this thing called B-encode, which is not human readable and I guess much denser than JSON is, just in terms of characters. But if you have escaping in your protocol and you have a Python implementation of it, it's going to have to be reading through individual characters and unescaping and stuff. So on top of all the just general ridiculous headaches of escape characters you're going to have, you're going to have performance problems. But if you have something that's length prefixed, it reads the length prefix and then says, okay, I want this amount, and waits until it has that amount, and just passes around the string. And actually, the way C handles strings has much more of a tendency to accidentally cause huge performance problems, because the immutable strings in Python tend to encourage you to just hand around a reference to a string and not copy it over, while on C it's very easy to accidentally write code that just kind of copies over the whole thing 5 times.
Well, the problem with copying a C string as well is you never know how long it's going to be until you get to the end.
Well, actually, with networking things, most of the performance problems have to do with how many times you copy your data over. The really, really high performance things are designed to pretty much directly take data that is on the network card and shove it directly onto disk.
If you think about it in terms of Python as well, I suppose escaping is a bad thing because it means you have to split a string into pieces and recreate another string, whereas if you have a string and you just want to prefix it with a length, you can send the length without allowing to.
Yeah, we usually have to copy it over. You usually have to copy it over once in Python because it comes in potentially in pieces over the wire, and so you have to kind of make it one coherent string after that. But that's not a terribly big deal. It turns out for most high performance applications. These days, most things have the big performance problem is cache misses, which doesn't exist in my little brain's model of what a computer is. See, in my little brain, what I learned in digital electrical engineering class in high school, you have an ALU and memory. But computers don't actually work that way anymore, and they've got these like hierarchies of memory and stuff. And there's the really, really fast memory, which there's there's the not so fast memory, which there's a lot more. And whenever you copy over a big enough string, you basically blow your really, really fast memory and have to do stuff with the really slow memory. And this is most of the performance issues and things that do a lot of just copying data around. So using an immutable string that you just pass around a reference to makes it so you don't do all these extra string copies, which can make things quite fast. So BitTorrent actually can perform pretty well. It may be that we'll wind up writing a port to C for like very high load servers or something. But the way BitTorrent protocol works, disk seeks are actually a much bigger issue than CPU.
So Python's basically quite efficient enough, no need to use C. Thank you very much.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, are you actually surprised by the changes in your life that have occurred as a result of BitTorrent becoming popular? I mean, I've heard estimates that some days BitTorrent handles between a third and a half of all the traffic that goes over the backbone.
Well, my life has been a chaotic mess since like 1995, and I keep trying to make it not be a chaotic mess, and for various and sundry reasons, it keeps not happening. So I've kind of given up on the whole concept and just accept that wacky things will happen in my life, you know, once every 6 months to a year or something like that. So, so in that sense, I haven't been surprised. But it is very surreal. It's very strange because, you know, BitTorrent is this thing that I wrote just kind of sitting in my living room on my laptop, and my friends would be like, "Hey, Bram, aren't you going to get a job?" And I'd be like, "No, see, I've got savings. See, I have savings. I'm having fun working on it." So it was really a lot of fun, just not worrying about money or anything. And, you know, I was living in San Francisco and rent's pretty expensive. Eventually, my savings kind of ran out, and I moved to Oakland. And my friends were like, "Hey, Bram, aren't you gonna like get a job?" I was like, "No, see, what you do is you get a credit card, right?"
For any kids out there, don't try this at home.
And then what you do with the credit card is you get a 0% introductory rate if you have credit. Yeah. So what you do is you start taking out money on the credit card. I also discovered that my you get like cash advance charges when you do stuff with the credit card. So I discovered that if I log into the bank that I normally use, it lets me directly transfer money from that credit card to my bank account without incurring a cash advance.
Oh, very good. So you save 2% on each transaction.
Yeah. Well, and then if you call and do a transaction that way, they max out the transfer fee at like $30 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, you know, transfer some money in, and then call and do the transfer from another credit card, and you know, take out money that way. So I didn't get much of a hit when I initially took it out. And a funny thing about introductory rates is you can keep them going for a while. So what you do is you have multiple credit cards, and then you just keep all the debt on one of them. And when the debt kind of gets enough,
it's over.
Yeah, you just do a transfer. And it's very important that you transfer all of it, because this makes you have very good credit. Because now you have a history of paying off your debt completely. And the other thing you can do is they actually count it against you very heavily. So eventually they kind of get annoyed at you and stop giving you low introductory rates. So you need more credit cards. Now the problem with getting more credit cards is they count it against you very heavily if you've been applying for a lot of credit. So you just kind of don't do that. You don't apply for any credit cards. You get these big stacks of please apply to us for credit things in the mail. But you just don't send those out, but you keep them around. You make a big stack of them. And what you do is you fill them all out and you send them all out on the same day, so they don't see each other.
Practical advice for financial management.
Yeah. So I have now, in fact, actually paid off my credit cards.
I'm very pleased to hear that. so this, and you think this is in no way associated with the fact that wacky things tend to happen every 6 months?
I appear to not really be able to feel anxiety properly.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's probably a survival trait in today's world, I would think.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who get panic attacks. I don't get that. But at some point I realized that I should probably worry about, you know, my own survival once in a while.
Well, I learned in my mid-20s, somebody once said to me, well, you'll die if you worry. And you'll die if you don't, so why worry? So I stopped worrying, actually. Why
I'm told that anxiety is, that panic is very useful if you're ever in the jungle and a tiger jumps out at you.
Well, if I'm ever in the jungle and a tiger jumps out at me, I'll remember that.
Yeah.
BitTorrent Inc. has been founded. How old is the company now?
It was founded last year. I mean, in some sense, the project was around since 2001. I was working on it full-time stuff. But the company as it exists today was kind of in 2004, actually, last year.
Yeah, right, so just something over a year old. Mm-hmm. And what's been happening since the company was founded? Where's it going? What's it doing?
We hired a bunch of people, and they have offices in downtown San Francisco. And we're pushing out a new release of the client, which hasn't been updated much recently, but we're going to have a very cool new release of the BitTorrent client with lots of cool features coming out not too long.
Oh, that reminds me of another question from a reader was, is there any implementation of the BitTorrent client whose GUI doesn't suck?
So mainline, people don't really realize this frequently. Mainline was like totally rewritten a while ago and actually does queuing and has multiple things in it. It's pretty nice. We're coming out with a much nicer version of it pretty soon.
Okay.
With all kinds of new features and stuff, but still totally usable. So, what was I saying before you interrupted me?
I can't remember. I was too busy interrupting you. I'm sorry about that. Who's the competition?
Oh, I was talking about BitTorrent and what we're doing, and we're also doing content deals.
Yeah.
And are going to be bringing content online pretty soon.
So, what, are you building a server infrastructure for content management?
Server, the whole bunch of different things. A lot of moving parts and bringing content online, actually. And also, we have this search engine that we've been using. It's improved a lot over time. So, lots of stuff going on there. We've got over a dozen employees, and we're actually hiring like Python people in the Bay Area. If you send your resume to jobs@bittorrent.com.
Jobs@bittorrent.com.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems like a lot of people hiring in the Python world. I think each one of our 3 platinum sponsors are hiring this week as well. So it seems like maybe working in Python's good at the moment. So I've heard about eDonkey and Overnet. I think you probably wouldn't consider Avalanche competition, but who do you perceive, or which products do you perceive as?
So about Avalanche.
Yeah, I was wondering whether you wanted to talk about Avalanche.
So there was this paper written that said, it didn't actually describe a fully fleshed out system, but the paper basically said, hey, if we use error correcting codes, then we don't have to worry quite so much about data loss in swarming distribution. So we propose a new swarming thing that uses error correcting codes, and we call it Avalanche. It's like, well, obviously I'd heard of this idea before. I mean, who ever thought of it? Gee, never heard that idea before.
Sure, it didn't seem innovative.
And actually Swarmcast used such things. So I went over, I posted, so people kept asking me about this, like, oh no, aren't you worried about Microsoft, blah, 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 blah. I was like, what?
Well, the only platform it runs on at the moment is PowerPoint, right?
Yes, that's correct. So I posted, so apparently people actually read my weblog. So I posted, I've got this blog, it's on LiveJournal, blah, blah, blah. It looks very, it probably looks pretty unprofessional actually, but it's where I just put my thoughts from time to time.
It looks like the scribblings of a busy man.
Yeah, so I started it because I have a lot of like really interesting technical ideas, and I don't really want to forget them, so they like nag at me and distract me from doing other things. So I started a weblog so I could just write these ideas up and post them and get them to stop nagging at me. And it's been pretty effective at doing that. So people were pestering me about this because it was getting hyped somehow, like this academic paper seemed worthy of like a press event or something. So just to answer everyone at once, I posted about it so I can just point people to my posting. I was like, look, this is vaporware, and I heard of this idea before, and it's broken because blah blah blah, long list of fairly technical reasons why it's a completely broken concept, and one of which is Rarest First does the exact same thing, and it's really easy. Somehow this was taken as like me like totally ragging on some real thing from Microsoft. Apparently the vaporware moniker.
BitTorrent author attacks Microsoft.
Yeah, pretty much. So apparently the vaporware moniker was taken as being very normative, which I found very strange because it's like, it's software that's been announced and has a name but doesn't have a line of code written. Therefore, vaporware seems like a totally reasonable designation for it. And this got picked up not only by some blogs and stuff, but appeared in like like newspapers, and there's like a newspaper in Australia where the person who commented on it picked up the story from somewhere else and complained like, our blog's fodder for like gossip now. Well, I guess it's better than writing about Tom Cruise anyway.
Well, the answer is these people are ruthless, Bram. They will use anything, right? Anything that gets them a story.
Yeah, I was surprised that qualified as a story. It seems like technical arguments and stuff to me. But yeah, apparently things that I post to my blog can get picked up a lot now. So
you're going to have to get used to that, I suspect.
Yeah. So I used to like just search for my name online, and then that got kind of old because I'd seen everything. And so then I started searching for like my name and random other words to see if I could find interesting other things, and like and searching for my name on Google News, and eventually I got bored of searching for my name and seeing all these results in Google News, and that was kind of depressing.
So you've actually said, I read somewhere, somebody once asked you, I think, what operating system you dislike most. And you said you hate computers, right?
Yes.
We needn't focus on the particular answer you gave on that particular occasion, because that particular occasion was just, the one that had been annoying at the time, and really they all annoy you.
Yes.
So why write software?
And I rather enjoy writing software. Unfortunately, you have to use computers in order to write software. Maybe Dijkstra had an approach to software that did actually involve using computers. But the way I like writing software, you actually need to use computers. I do frequently, run into some kind of a problem with some broken API or something. I've gotten a little more mellow over time, but I used to ask questions like, could somebody please tell me which schmuck at Microsoft did this so I can go bang down his door with a baseball bat? Because it's really pissing me off.
Yes, I think as one grows older, some of that tends to get put down in the background.
I sure hope so.
Oh, it does. You'll find as your family grows up, for example, you'll become more mellow. You're a father for the second time recently?
And another one on the way.
So do you like to maintain a balance between work and the rest of your life, or is work just a thread that runs through?
No, I couldn't really function if I did nothing but work, I think. These days I mostly, especially on weekdays, I can get up and go to work, and then I come home and I play with the kids and put them to bed and go to sleep. That's pretty much my whole day, and I don't really get all that much free time. I get some free time on weekends and stuff, and try and do just sanity-preserving activities. And I enjoy work, and I really enjoy playing with my kids, but I definitely notice the lack of just unstructured free time once in a while. It makes it hard to be functional.
I think those are called vacations, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I thought it was called being between jobs, actually. See, programmers in the Bay Area don't really take vacations so much as they wait for their current employer to implode, and then they just wait a while before finding
Okay, so BitTorrent's attracted venture capital now, so you've got a significant start to being able to implement the plans that you're developing.
Venture capital helps you employ people.
Sure. Do you find it difficult to deal with the venture capitalists, or is it just like a one-shot deal where you score the money and then ignore them for 2 years? Or?
The VCs we have are Doll Capital Management. They're actually fairly helpful. We have board meetings from time to time.
So you actually find them, they do help you move forward?
Well, they're supportive and stuff.
Do you have a description of the BitTorrent business model, or? I can take that as a no if you want. Well, I know that you've actually hired Ashin Naveen, is it, as a COO to presumably...
Well, see, I hate that question, and having nothing whatsoever to do with it being a valid question, but with it being a question which people who know nothing about business seem really insistent on asking. There's this thing in the Bay Area where you grill people about their business plans, and it's really an exercise in rhetoric, having nothing whatsoever to do with whether their business plans are reasonable. And I've gotten annoyed with doing it over time. But what we're doing is we're going to have 4K content in various ways, and we have ad revenue from the search engine, and a few other revenue streams we're working on.
Yeah, I heard you visited, was it LA, and talked to people from the RIAA sometime?
We are in talks with the RIAA. We actually have a deal with the NPAA having to do with getting infringing content off of our website, off of our search engine index.
Has that been a big issue for you? Or?
Well, no, they send us takedowns and we take it down.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so you just comply as required.
Yeah, and we're also talking to all the major studios about content deals as well.
Great, good. So, how much email do you get nowadays? Have you any idea? In fact, I mean, I no longer know how many emails hit my address because the wonderful tool Spambase just takes out a lot of the crap.
Yeah.
Have you any idea how much mail you're getting?
Well, ignoring spam, I get, I don't know, maybe 10 pieces of mail a day. Fortunately, a lot of them are just like people mailing me cold, which I should do something about, and usually I do. I made it very hard to find my email address at some point, because I got really sick of people sending me tech support questions. So, you know, when I was first working on BitTorrent, whenever I got a tech support question, I was really excited. and I go and help them out. So,
yeah, after the first 1,000, it gets kind of old.
Yeah, that's basically the problem. Well, and also there comes a point where most of the tech support requests you're getting are problems not in your software, but in like the operating system that the software is running on top of.
Yeah.
So I've told people that they should call the os.unfuck call.
os.unfuck?
Yeah. That call is unfortunately not widely available on the platform.
No, I was going to say, I think that still needs implementing on many of the platforms I'm on. Sure.
If I could write software that didn't have to actually run on a computer, maybe I could get around that problem.
Okay, so you will be working with Dijkstra people, the people who did it all as Gedanken experiment.
Maybe we just need to return to the C64 days where you don't have a real operating system and your software just takes over the machine.
Yeah, but now it would have to be the C1024 or something like that. 64K is no longer enough. So you've instigated a conference yourself, right? You started CodeCon.
CodeCon, yes.
And CodeCon it was what, a month ago? Less than a month ago?
The fifth one was about a month ago.
Okay, fine. We could maybe take that call later, do you think?
Yes, I think so. So I can't actually figure out how to make this phone be quiet.
Oh, I have a £6 clubhouse little phone.
Someone else took it from me and figured out how to make it quiet a little while ago, and it was just on vibrate for like a week.
Well, yeah, but cell phones are the new VCRs, like, right? What you really need to operate a cell phone is a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah, well, it would be kind of cool to have a script for your phone which made it have a flashing 12 o'clock on it at all.
Oh, well, what you need is a Series 60 phone, and then you can program it in Python, like we don't have. So yeah, was CodeCon good? What kind of thing goes on at CodeCon? I've never been to one of these conferences.
CodeCon is somewhat anomalous as a conference. It is, it's 3 days. It's typically 15 presentations. It costs less than $100. It is held in a nightclub in San Francisco, which nightclub varies from year to year. And the rules are that each presentation is basically 45 minutes and has to have a working demo and be presented by one of the people actually writing code for it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of bam, all these like cool projects. And generally speaking, in terms of, we have an actual review process for CodeCon, and we get some fairly interesting academic work as well that's kind of being taken much more seriously now that it's been around for a couple of years. but sort of things we look for at CodeCon are projects which are either very new and cool and interesting, or projects that are really getting to be mature and people should know about, and projects that are just so crazy and insane we can't reject them. So it's a combination of those different things, and I won't point out which ones I think are which. But
Okay, any highlights from the conference for you?
This last year, in terms of presentations, or what?
What do you remember from the conference most easily?
Well, there's this site advisor tool, which will warn you about which websites have malware on them, and which ones, if you put your email address in, will send you all sorts of garbage mail, and things like that.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. And actually I believe that was announced actually at CodeCon, so I started doing that product. It's very cool. And there's an anti-phishing set of tools that were done there. And also, there's a presentation on this database product, which was done by Len, who was my roommate when I founded CodeCon, and runs it with me. Meredith gave that presentation, and after it was over, he asked her to marry him.
At the conference?
Yeah, at the conference. It was very dramatic, and she said yes, thankfully.
Yeah,
might have been a bit like a more dramatic story had she said no, but
no, this guy's obviously not scared of rejection, right?
Yeah. So that was good.
Okay, I noticed as well that one of the things that's come up at BitTorrent is use of name issues, and we're just starting to get to grips with that problem.
Well, there's
in
some
the Python world, so I wondered if
there's some just outright scammers who are putting like ads on Google and stuff, basically claiming to be BitTorrent Inc., saying, "Hey, give us $40 for a subscription, for a BitTorrent subscription," and they're just criminals. So we're attending to. We actually have been sending the lawyers after them for a while. So
cease and desist, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and more than that in some cases. So.
Yeah, in fact, usually I figure that once you've done with the lawyers, maybe what you need is the guys who break knees. Might actually have a more serious effect on these people, but it's a bit like whack-a-mole, right? You hit one, and
actually, there aren't really very many of them. Actually.
Oh, okay. So they just have many personalities and appear quite diverse.
Yeah, there's actually a group called Day Networks, which went ahead and got like German trademarks on like Skype and eDonkey and BitTorrent and a whole bunch of other things, and they have all of these.
So they use the fact that they've trademarked them in Germany as some kind of ersatz or pseudo defense.
Yeah, what's really weird is that it's all like one company registering all of them, which would appear to be, mighty suspicious.
Yes.
But,
I can't use BitTorrent from work because of the ports and all that, but I use it from home and then just do a straight upload to work. Is there any plans for a project where you can do BitTorrent-y stuff either across firewalls or inside of a firewall?
BitTorrent doesn't really need to allow incoming connections. In order to work under some circumstances, it will work worse if it can't accept incoming connections, but it should generally work unless your firewall at work is really just banned BitTorrent traffic generally.
It's also a policy issue, so I work around it.
Yeah. We are adding stuff to do firewall punching. We added a UPnP support recently to be able to accept incoming connections for a pretty significant number of firewalls. So yeah, we're working on stuff like that.
Okay. So are you enjoying being Mr. CEO as opposed to Bram, who sits writing code and spending money on credit cards that he doesn't have the funds to pay back?
So being a coder as a lifestyle is really, really good. You get up in the morning and you actually do real work all day, and you can actually point to something you accomplished on any given day. And being in management doesn't really do that. But I I am kind of overseeing the company right now, and it's definitely interesting in a number of ways. I have an interest in finance and stuff. So I do find that business generally. So I do find running the business kind of interesting in a number of ways, and it definitely has its aggravations and its tedious and unpleasant tasks. But I guess overall enjoying it. The main thing right now is that I just have to be physically at work during certain hours at a certain amount of gym. The combination of that and having a family makes it so I have to have a pretty disciplined schedule in order to handle it well. And I'm a pretty serious insomniac. It gets a little difficult sometimes.
So the scope of BitTorrent as it's currently used is pretty much for transferring large
files,
media files. But have you ever considered it as like a replacement for HTTP, or like so in other words, everybody being a sort of virtual HTTP server?
Well, using it to distribute the web, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing that was very anomalous about BitTorrent at the time was it didn't really try and change the web at all. Like downloads are kicked off using the web, you find things using the web, yada yada yada. And I would describe the architecture to people, and they would say, "But Bram, how do people find things?" And I'd say, "Google." So BitTorrent actually does use HTTP for getting the torrent file and for tracker communications, and just out of necessity, because it's a really, really poor mapping, it doesn't use HTTP for the peer protocol, but it actually ties directly in with the web as much as possible, and doesn't try and reinvent that whole thing.
But you don't see it as a mechanism for distributing web content?
It is a mechanism for distributing web content.
Yeah.
It's quite well.
But not for individual web pages, more just...
No. You actually want a tool that has very different properties if you're doing like individual images and stuff in web pages, because for that you want something which is very low latency and where the files are relatively small, so like diff for tat doesn't work, and it has a whole bunch of different requirements that you need to follow their protocol. I don't know of anyone who's done a particularly good job of making a protocol that does that at this point. BitTorrent, if you get it from me, has never had any spyware. Some of the scammers have loads of nasty spyware if you get it from them. So if you want to get BitTorrent, don't do a web search for BitTorrent and click on the ads. Go to BitTorrent.com and download it from there.
Always deal with a reputable supplier, kid. But yeah, I think, are there any issues of distributed protocol design you're currently wrestling with, or do we have time for that just at the moment?
There's BitTorrent related things. We've got a bunch of interesting stuff going on there that we're working on. That will be announced. That's kind of fun. In some ways, I find BitTorrent related things kind of boring at this point. You work on something for a couple of years and you get pretty familiar with it. So as a sanity preservation measure, I spend some of my time dealing with code bill merge, the precise code bill merge recently, and that actually has problems that I haven't spent years dealing with already. So I assume that'll eventually get something wrong.
Yeah, your microphone's going in and out.
I assume that will eventually get old as well, and I'll have to find something else to interest me. But there are all kinds of projects that I like to work on that I don't have time for. Like, I'm really into designing twisty puzzles, like Rubik's Cube kind of things. And I really ought to learn SolidWorks and actually CAD a couple of them. But that requires more than a couple hours.
Yeah, so you're busy with other things. Well, thank you very much for your time, Bram. I hope that we'll see you at future PyCon. Bram's going to be around for the rest of the day, and you know what he looks like now. So if you've got any other questions, then please feel free to buttonhole him and see if you can't make him feel welcome enough that he comes back next year. Ladies and gentlemen, Bram Cohen.